Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've done a Q&A. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is Nick, a Millennial. We're doing another Q&A with Erica Connocelli. She is a registered nurse. We're going to be talking about correctional nurses today. But please tell us a little bit about yourself and background.
Well, I'm Erica. I used to be a correctional nurse. Right now I do clinical supervising for home care for pediatrics. I've been a nurse for almost 4 years. I love nursing, very happy with my decision, and right now I work for Maxim Healthcare, and I'm liking that as well.
Alright everyone, so make sure you stay tuned. And anyone, please, who is new to this channel, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, like the video. And anyone who's doing anything in the medical field, make sure you tune in and share the video, okay? Alright, so now we're going to get into these questions. Okay, so now we're going to start with some of these questions. Now, previously, as I've done before, there was long questions, so I made some adjustments, made them short, so we'll get short and sweet to the point, so everyone can be in tune and entertained by the video, and everybody was curious about the medical field and what she did as a correctional nurse. So our first question here is, being a correctional nurse, is your safety at risk at any given time?
Well, your safety is always at risk anytime that you're working, because you're always with the inmates, but luckily we have qualified correctional officers. They are always with us. If we're giving out meds, they're with us. If we are doing wound care or vitals or detox checks, they're with us, just to make sure that our safety is always their priority. If we ever feel that we are not safe and we don't have an officer with us, because sometimes they do have shortages, it's life, they do have a little red panic button underneath the desk, and you press the button and you could expect like 10 officers in 30 seconds. Like, you hear the keys jingling down the hall and they usually come right to your aid. Luckily I've never had to use that button, but they do have that. So yes, your safety is always at risk with correctional nursing, but I just kind of not think about who I'm with. I don't think about what I'm doing and where I am. I just do my job.
So as she says, I know a lot of y'all put like with safety, like that's why I came with that question. That's very important. Safety is very important. Alright, so on to our next question. How often must you check your inventory? Because we know people have sticky fingers.
Well, the nurses and the inmates can have sticky fingers. At the end of every shift, there's 3 shifts in a day, we have to check inventory, meaning sharps, which are needles, anything that you can inject into someone. Narcotics, of course, any kind of drug of choice like Klonopin, Ativan, Tylenol with codeine. Then you have instruments, which are our hemostats, our scissors, things like that. We check it at the end of every shift. So first shift will work, but in order for first shift to start working and for third shift to stop working, we have to do the inventory. Third shift cannot go home until everything's accounted for. So if we're counting the insulin needles for our diabetics and we're missing 1 needle, we kind of go through the computer, check the documentation, see if we could find who we missed to write down the name for the specific needle that was used, because every needle needs a name. If we're missing one and we don't know what happened to it, we unfortunately have to end up calling security, because then it's a security issue. If we have an idea for where it is, what section or what pod as it is in, then they will strip the whole section and check for the needle. At the end, if it's just 1 needle and we can't find it, then it kind of just is what it is.
Now, when you're saying that first shift can't start until third shift completed their inventory, do you do that as a team, or only like third shift has to check everything that they've done before, and like first it's like, all right, cool, we just want to chill over here?
We have to do it collaboratively. So first shift actually physically counts, and third shift will read it off. So third shift would say insulin needles, we should have 460. Then the first shift nurse would count 460 needles. If there's not 460 needles, then it was off, and we would have to bring it to the attention of our managers.
All right, on to our next question here, because we were just speaking about inventory. So our next question is, when checking or assisting an inmate with injury, is there often more than 1 nurse assisting an inmate, or are you just there by yourself assisting an inmate?
9 times out of 10 you're by yourself. Sometimes you can have another nurse with you if it's something that you need sterile technique and aseptic, which is clean technique. But other than that, it's usually just one nurse. But like I said, it's very rarely nurse and inmate, and that's it. It usually is an officer in between. So if we ever do need the assistance of a nurse, though, then we usually have to just call to whatever triage room they're in, and they come and assist us as needed.
What's a triage room?
A triage room is a room where you conduct all of your assessments for the day, your wound care for the day. We check vitals, blood pressure for people who have high blood pressure. We check theirs every morning just to make sure that their meds are therapeutic. And then we do diabetic checks, which is checking blood sugars 3 times a day in the triage rooms. So we usually get a list of everybody. We call each section officer, let them know who's on our list. Then we call the activity bubble, which is like the bubble in between all the sections that gives us the officer that's our floating officer, the one who's going to transport the inmates back and forth from section or line them up and make sure that we're safe while we're in the triage room.
Now, being a correctional nurse, do you work long hours? For example, some nurses work long hours at hospitals, like they might do like a 12-hour shift, 13-hour shift. Is that the same as a correctional nurse, or is like you're strictly on shifts? That's it.
Well, we do have 3 shifts. They're 8 hours each. But really, a lot of times you can choose when you want to work. With the prison, there's always overtime. So if you want to work a 16-hour shift, then go ahead, you work a double. If you only want to stay for 12 hours, then we make sure that you are there for an appropriate 12 hours, meaning that the prison has lockdown hours where you can't have access to any inmates. So if you want to work 12 hours, we try and make it so that you would be productive in your 12 hours and you wouldn't be sitting for 4 to 6 hours of that 12-hour shift.
For example, if somebody wanted to do a 12-hour shift and it's during that lockdown period, what exactly, for example, what they would do at that time? Would they just go through paperwork, do inventory, or make sure anything is out of the source, or make sure it's fully staffed or anything like that?
Usually during lockdown time, we're documenting. Documentation is really big in nursing. You have to document everything that you did. So if you do wound care, you document exactly what you did, if the patient tolerated it well, and if they left your triage room without further incident. That's very important. You want to make sure that you said the inmate was a whole when they left your triage room. So normally in between lockdown periods, we're doing a lot of documentation. Our triage lists can be 30 to 40 inmates. It can be 10 to 20. And sometimes in order to get all of your people seen, you just go ahead and write little blurbs down and you see everyone back to back, and then you go back to the office where we had a medical office, and during lockdown hours is when we would be able to chart everything that we did.
Okay. Now when you say when they leave the triage room as a whole, I know I'm not the only one thinking this, so I want to ask this question. So like if someone left the triage room, but then they got shanked like right there and had to come back, that's not you guys' fault. You just gotta treat them again, pretty much.
You'd write a whole new documentation for the second thing, the stabbing injury. But it really usually wouldn't happen that way. I mean, if someone got shanked in the hallway, you hear a bunch of officers running down, they would probably OC spray both of them, unfortunately, and then they would get dragged to the medical office. They usually wouldn't go to the triage room. The medical office is where we have the managers, the doctors, because after that, a doctor would probably have to see them.
I know I was the only one thinking that question. Okay, I know I was thinking that question. Alright. So moving forward to the next question. This is one I found really important and I think will hit home for you. What really inspired you to be a nurse?
I really wanted to be a part of someone either getting better or be a part of someone's last days, because unfortunately that's nursing too. Just helping others. I mean, when you work in accounting, you kind of help your business get money. If you work as like a mechanic, you kind of help that person's car, but then I like to actually help the person themselves. I get satisfaction and pride knowing that I did something for someone else. That's just my kind of way of living. I like to make others happy. I like to make others better. I like to do whatever I can. And so that's what inspired me to be a nurse, was to know that I could be a part of someone getting better, or like I said, someone's last days, but making their last days as best as possible.
So everyone has their own reason to being a nurse. Some may line up with hers, some may not. You never know. So I thought it was an important question, so I threw that in.
I definitely have to say that some nurses that do it for the money, because there are some out there, that's probably not a good decision, because lives aren't to mess with. I wouldn't want anybody to become a nurse just for the money and not care about their job. You deal with people all times of your shift, all day, you know, like whenever you're at work, you have to care for the person in front of you. If you're just doing it for the money, you may not pay attention in class and you may not know your stuff as well. I just feel that that probably shouldn't be a reason why we get into healthcare. So for that reason, that actually could hurt you in the end, because you may get your license and make good money, but you could just as easily lose your license from not practicing the real nursing scope way. You have to follow policies and procedures, and if you don't follow them, you could go to court, someone could sue you, and you could lose your license, and then that looks really bad on you trying to get any other kind of license or any other kind of degree, because you have to report that you lost your license. It's usually always a question to answer.
Would that be on par, for example, if somebody was to lose their license, would that be on par of like somebody who just got a job, because it's really hard for them to get a job because they lost their license, so they have to list why they lost their license?
Well, they obviously wouldn't be able to have another nursing job ever again, but if they were to go back to school and try and go testing for another kind of license, they may be asked, did you ever have a professional license before? Was your license revoked? And if so, why?
What were some of the struggles you had to face when becoming a nurse in school? For example, balancing your personal life and your professional life.
Well, when I was in high school, I honestly got by. I got good grades and everything, just studying 1 or 2 days before a test. But in nursing school, you cannot do that. I actually tried that my first semester, and I failed. You have to learn everything for your, seminar that you have that day, and go home and review it and study it. And then the next day, you learn new material, and you have to go home and study that material, plus review what you learned the day before. So you may have a test 2 weeks out, but you have to be studying every day for those 2 weeks. You cannot cram in nursing school. It's not advised. It will get you to fail. And nursing schools are very, very strict. And that is what I struggled with at first, obviously, because I had failed my first semester. A failing degree was 75%. So if you got a 75% or less, you failed the semester. If you failed 2 semesters, you never got to step foot in that nursing school again. So they're very, very strict because, like I said, you're learning how to care for people in their lives. It's not anything to mess with. So that was the struggle. And then balancing my life and balancing school was hard because in the middle of school, I had a baby. But the school that I went to, they were fortunate enough to offer me an evening and weekend program. So every other weekend I would go on clinical, and then the evenings I would go to school like 3 or 4 times during the week. But I would have the availability to work a little hours in the morning or during the day, see my baby, and then I would go to school. So it was a struggle to balance it. I was very busy with studying and everything, but if you set your mind to it, you think about it, it was only 3 years that I had to be in school to get my registered nurse degree, and it was worth it. So I just really paid attention and made sure I didn't fail again, and I made sure that I passed, and I ended up getting my license, which was great.
There you go. Mm-hmm. So as Erica said, you cannot cram.
No.
You can't do it. You have to study. You may struggle, but, balancing that out. But you'll find it, the silver lining's a little bit, right there. Just make sure you study. I know I went through that stuff too, and I'm like, oh, cool. I'm going to just study like the day before. Nah, doesn't work. Doesn't work, especially for mechanics. It doesn't work. Being a nurse or a correctional nurse, have you ever been put in a situation where you had to make that call where you couldn't save someone?
Well, being in the jail, unfortunately, can sometimes be depressing to the inmates. They sometimes can feel suicidal. We do see suicides or attempts of suicide a lot. They tend to lose their support systems on the outside. Their family sometimes isn't happy with them and where they are, so they won't call them. They don't have any control. The officers tell them what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. They do get 3 meals a day and a hot shower, but sometimes that shower is cold. Sometimes those meals stink. Like, it's just a very somnolent place to be. And it sometimes puts people over the edge and they don't know how to handle their emotions. So we do have attempts of suicide and we do have successful suicides. I have personally been in a predicament where I arrived and the patient was blue. But the thing that you have to do in correctional nursing is CPR, and you don't stop. Someone's calling the ambulance, you tell the officers, to call the SOC bubble, which is pretty much the security of operations bubble, the big main bubble in the jail. They usually call the ambulance arrives. They also, too, try CPR to revive someone, just in case we have that glimmer of hope that we can get a pulse, because if you can get a pulse and you have the AED attached to the inmate, you'll be able to shock them and you might be able to bring them back to life. But unfortunately, there are times where we want to give up. Just in correctional nursing, you normally don't. And the reason being is that the jail could go on maximum lockdown, which nobody wants. That's where the inmates can only get out when they're eating. The officers can only escort one inmate at a time in a hallway. It just causes a lot more problems. So usually what we do is, even though we know the patient may be dead and there may not be any saving them, we try. And we try until the ambulance gets there. And then the EMTs try. And they try until they're out of the facility. And then once they're out of the facility, they're in the ambulance and they're still trying to perform CPR and try and get a pulse to shock, and they can't. That's where they pronounce them dead. So I wasn't there for this circumstance, but the one time, the nurses on my shift, third shift, I worked overnight, they had an emergency that they responded to, and 2 girls were actually overdosed on the floor. Imagine one person overdosed, they had 2. And they, one nurse on one inmate and one nurse on another did CPR, and the one girl was blue, and they said that they were like, oh no, there's no chance of getting her back. And they worked hard, and they actually didn't give up, and they ended up reviving both of them.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So there are times where we know that clinically in our head, this probably isn't going to go well. But if we follow protocol and we really try and we do CPR correctly, you actually can save someone's life. And they ended up saving 2 that night. So that was awesome. I was very happy. We had a party and everything because I was like, you saved 2 people. Like, I couldn't imagine that. I was kind of glad I wasn't there. But if I was there, I would have just went right into nurse mode.
We're people, we're people. Also, sometimes, I wish I was there, but when you're there, you gotta do what you gotta do,
Yeah, my job. I made a note.
So I can't think of any other way to end this Q&A with just a beautiful story of reviving 2 people. 2 people. And they had a party, to celebrate because, lives are very important, especially when being a nurse, a correctional nurse. It's an incredible thing when you can actually do something and provide for somebody. You actually bring someone back. That's an incredible thing. You never forget that. I want to leave on that, close out on that note because that's a beautiful thing, So before we leave out, make sure you subscribe to the channel because we have more Q&As coming in the future. And if you didn't, watch the whole thing, go back, watch the whole video. It's very important because it might be important to you in the future or somebody else. So make sure you share the video on all your social media platforms and make sure to follow my social media platforms down below in the description box. And stay tuned, stay tuned. But before we wrap up, do you have anything that you want to say to yourself so you can look back on this later on in the future?
I guess I would just say, make sure that you stay a lovable nurse. Always follow policy, but just always think of the person's life that's at hand. And, keep going, keep doing what you're doing and doing it right. And I guess one piece of advice that I could give for anybody who's interested in correctional nursing, this was always a question that I had in my heart, and I'm just going to give you guys the best answer that I can, is that Yes, we work with inmates, and yes, some of these inmates have did some horrific things to other people, to themselves, to the government. We deal with horrible people. But you are a nurse, you took an oath, you said no matter what, I cannot be biased, I cannot judge, I cannot look at someone differently and give them different care because of their history. So no matter what their charges, no matter why they're there at the jail, you treat them like anybody else. Because at the end of the day, it's also your nursing license on the line. So don't be biased, don't judge, just kind of try and get it to the back of your head and take care of that person as best as possible, because they are your patient, they're under your care, and your care is under your license.
There you go. That's wonderful. Thank you again for joining us with this Q&A, and make sure you subscribe to the channel.
Yes.
And go follow all the social media platforms, because I always make announcements. And those who have been following my social media platforms, you're probably going to see the pictures that we already did during this and after this and whatnot, because this is awesome. But stay tuned. Always keep your head up. Never give up. And we'll see you guys soon in the next video. Peace.